breaking protocol here, breaking protocol. But look, data matters dramatically. What doesn't get measured doesn't get done. We are a data-driven organization. We want everybody to have data, access data, produce data. We welcome data because I think that that's what is going to empower us, the spinach for Popeye. And so I'm really delighted to see so much data, everyone that comes here. And I just want to say, it is an incredibly full house. Thank you so much for everybody to coming. 800 seats is the first ever time that we increased that number so much. So thank you so very much. And I also want to tell you why you're sitting in your seat is because we trust you. We trust that you're going to get something done, that you're going to invest in the Latino community. We had more than what you can imagine interest in coming today. Well, we selected you to be here. In every single one of the seats is a hope and an intention of change because I am sure that we can make it happen, that this is the time for Latinos, and we're counting on all of you to be there as change agents. And for that, we're going to equip you with not only all the data that you need, but tomorrow with the resources and the tools needed. Stacie de Armas from Nielsen and I have partnered in the production of the Hispanic Sentiment Study 2023. As I alluded before, we did the Hispanic Sentiment Study 2018. And for those of you at the back, I've been in the back at the United Nations. If you don't have your hearing aid, it's going to be very hard for you to hear. It's going to give you a lot of pleasure to have our incredible voices very close to your ear. So I do recommend that you wear them. But we did the Hispanic Sentiment Study 2018 measuring the sentiment of Latinos. There's an incredible amount of data about demographics. There's an incredible amount of data of hardcore data, but we needed the sentiment. How are we feeling? How are we trusting? How are we moving forward? Not trusting. Trust is Richard. But pretty much we want to share with you the Hispanic Sentiment Study 2023. We released some of the data at the Cannes Advertisement Festival. Today, we're launching nationally the Hispanic Sentiment Study 2023. And for that, I want to ask my partner, Stacie de Armas, to take us along.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Senora Huerta. And, of course, Dr. Andrade. It's a pleasure to be here. We're going to go through some slides quickly, try and get everyone back on schedule. So let's just get started. The first thing I want to acknowledge, and then I'm going to turn it over to Claudia to talk a little bit about what she's been talking about in terms of increase of pride and unity. But the first thing I want to mention is that I think the general sentiment we saw from this study, thank you, I think the general sentiment we saw from this study was this fundamental opinion or sentiment around America perhaps not meeting her obligation. So I'm actually glad Richard went first because he was the first one to address some of the tough topics. You'll hear a lot of the great things today. You'll hear about increasing unity and pride, but we're also going to talk a little bit about what we can do. Claudia said there's 806 of us here, the vast majority business leaders or in the position to have impact. And so we're equipping you with some data so that you can make some change in your sphere. Richard also talked about sort of the macro opinion of where things can go in movements that Latinos used to expect to today expecting it in their direct peer-to-peer network and close to them. So that is each of you. Each of you as business leaders will have the opportunity to have some impact. I'll talk about the major themes in a second, but we can go to the first slide. And Claudia, I'd like for you to address a little bit of what we talked about in Cannes. This is overall businesses and then, of course, unity.
Latinos are driving America's growth. If you don't know by now, if you don't feel it by now that we're driving America's prosperity, power, and progress, let's say it again, please. Like we're driving the growth of this country. And yet, we feel excluded from the American narrative. We feel not reflected by big brands and media, and that has been decreasing year after year for the last 5 years, where we have been feeling benched, invisible and not seen. And that is causing us to feel a disruption while the pride of Latinos is increasing, while we are increasingly feeling more Latinos, reclaiming our Latinidad, having our language increase, our culture increase, our food increase. For all of you that have felt it in your bones that it is better to be Latino today, that has been increasing. But We have been feeling every time more neglected, even rejected by big brands and media, giving us an opportunity for all of the companies and brands here to pay attention on how to put us more in front of cameras, behind the cameras, and how to reflect us without stereotypes, creating a narrative that is meaningful, respectful, and relevant.
Thank you. So let's get to it. The next slide addresses unity. I'm going to leave it here for a minute for you to look at. Claudia mentioned some data before. What is important is that there is still some steadiness around unity and pride. There are some metrics where the number increased significantly, but in here, generally speaking, Latinos are feeling that their values are shared and reflected at about the same rate with the rest of America. What's important about this is if you think about the original time the study was produced in 2018, and you think about all of the things that our country and our economy and specifically Latinos have been through, to have this number remain steady is really indicative of pride growing within the community. Next slide. Beyond, one of the important things around the sentiment studies that we found was this real shift in perception over the past 5 years. If you've been here in America over the past 5 years or have been reading about her, you certainly will have seen that there has been a significant change. There are a lot of years that we have been through. What I want to point out here, the most important sort of overarching narrative where we think you can all have an impact is over the past 5 years, there seems to be a slipping away of the American dream for Latinos. I'm going to let you sit with that for a minute. The percentage of Latinos that believe the American dream is alive and well has decreased significantly from 2008 to 2013, with 38% of Latinos believing the American dream has disappeared or no longer exists, versus 31% believing that in 2018. 45% of Latinos in 2023 believe the American dream is still alive, but not once what it was. But the largest decline in optimism, and perhaps the most disappointing point for me, is about the American dream being alive and well for Latinas. 13% in 2023 versus 22% in 2018. That's a 10 percentage point decline. We all know Latina Equal Pay Day is among the last in the year, but to see the Latina, which we heard earlier, making most of the decisions in her household and a significant part of the glue of our community, feeling that her dream is slipping away. When you think about the American dream, it's more than just economics. It has to do with our place in the community, who we rely upon, who's looking out for us, and within this study, there's a lot of very specific research, and I want to put a shout out to Mike LaCosta from Ethnifacts, who helped us analyze the data and compare it 2018 to 2023. Thank you, Mike, and your team for that. There's more data within this research, so you can really look by generation what's occurring. The other important point I wanted to bring to you on this slide was that the priorities also seem to have shifted, and this aligns with what we're seeing in terms of the degradation of the American dream. Your dark blue is 2018 and your red is 2023. You can really see this difference in what Richard described too, which is these sort of macro ideas becoming less important than they were in 2018, and micro ideas that impact Latinos personally becoming more important in 2023. As an example, I'm sorry, if you can go back just 1 minute. This is a really important slide, and I'd rather spend just a second on this one. The economy is still increasingly important, and cost of living, gun control. These are all very personal, right? These are things that affect you in your neighborhood as an individual versus things like national infrastructure, politics, and news and information, and immigration. That was a surprising one for us, too, the decline in the interest. That doesn't mean that it's not important still or not being paid attention to. It means that for Latinos, there's been this dramatic shift of what it means to become to realize that dream and to grow in America. It is exactly what Richard discussed, going from CEOs to my CEO. In this case, big issues are incredibly important, but the ones that impact me, my family, and my community are the most important ones. Moving on to the next slide, the reality of the economic anxiety is beyond evident in this study. There was a significant rise in concerns, as I mentioned, about the economy and cost of living. Of course, many of us are experiencing that, right? That's not specific to the Latino community. However, the Latino community, having expressed concern and having seen less success in years past, I can understand, as I'm sure you can, how this is impactful now. Thinking about individual businesses and things that individual close touch points, people that have close touch points can do in this space. Think about things like mentorship programs, additional healthcare opportunities in the place where you employ Latinos. Is there access to mental health, more information on access to education? There are things we can do at a micro level that will impact this community and help the community grow. All generations. By the way, we looked at this data a number of ways. We looked at it overall for entire communities. We looked at it by gender, as we mentioned. We also looked at it by generation. And the impact of the different demographics, like Spanish speakers, for example, and Gen X, tied really strongly into some of these that ranked very high. Employment satisfaction is one, jobs prospects, and economic concerns among the highest for Spanish language dominant Latinos. On the next slide, this is kind of a tricky slide, so you've got to read it slow. Only 30% agree in 2023 that the Hispanic community is valued as much as it should be in the United States today. Only about a third. But that's low, but it's up from 16%. So that's a remarkable statistic. A third of Latinos today are saying our community is valued as much as it should be. Now, yes, that's one of those tricky ones, right? Like only a third, but look at that increase. That tells us we're starting to realize and recognize our power. Richard talked a little bit about that as well. So in some cases, pride, it may seem like it is low, but it is growing and is growing significantly. On the next slide, influence on society in America. This is a little bit more on that. The question here was overall, how much influence do you feel the Latino community has on society and government? Again, the remarkable data point here is the difference between 2018 to 2023. In 2023, 75% of Latinos indicated that the Latino economy, the Latino community has some or a great deal of influence versus just 32% in 2018. That's a 43% increase in Latinos saying our community has a great deal of influence in this country. The challenge has become how we harness that influence and what we do about it. I was speaking earlier going over this data, and I acknowledged that we know the Latino community has grown in influence, right? Not just by the size of the numbers that we've seen, but think about what you've seen in politics and in media. Think about the Latino community vote, which has become something that has become very contentious. A lot of discussion, right? What's happening with the community, both sides of the community. How are we, bifurcated? This is a topic that has become central. It's always been talked about, but so central that it tells me that the influence and the impact of our community is now, absolutely cannot be ignored, but it's beyond I think what our own community realizes. So I was very happy to see that. On this next slide, and we'll be releasing all this to you, so don't worry about having to see all these little things. The idea here is a heat map by generation. So we could look at the issues, or in this case, the statistics that were most surprising among Latinos. Importantly, I'll just point out a few. Hispanic voting eligibility. Very strong reaction from matures there. Those that were 78 and over were absolutely shocked at the number of eligible Hispanic voters, possibly because of their long-term perspective on demographic and political shifts. The population growth were surprising also among matures, not really having a handle on our power by different category. Home ownership rates were surprisable among boomers, not so much for younger Latinos, which I found interesting. By the way, these are independent. Each column is independent of the other. Educational attainment is something we're going to dive into just a little bit, but a lot of optimism there, but also a lot of skepticism. We'll talk about that. You can next slide, and you can skip this one too. This is the same thing by language. Essentially, based on your language preference, you have a very different perception of what the issues are and what's important. What I want to talk here about is belief in access to educational opportunities. Now, I'm sure when you look at this, you're like, well, this looks not very good at all. Right? We have a decrease from 2018 to 2023 in the belief in access to educational opportunities. But I want to clarify something for you. Optimism is through the roof. And I had another chart in here. We ended up taking it out. It's the exact opposite. Optimism around the ability to advance. So Latinos believe, yes, I can advance through education. I can advance through education. There are amazing educational opportunities. I'm going to take advantage of them. The breakdown comes in how to do that, in access. So we've all heard, right? There are loans, there are ideas, there are opportunities, there are scholarships, there are ways we can do this. But the challenge becomes actually how. which is why Claudia brought us together. And I think what we'll be doing tomorrow is working on the action plan of how. And again, keep in mind, I didn't show you the other slide. It's exact opposite. Everyone believes there's chances and opportunities are through the roof. How do we do them has become the problem. The next slide is just one more to really drive home that same point. The percentage of Gen Z who agree that they have great access to educational opportunities is down 17% since 2019. Now, that's a disappointing statistic, I know. But what it means is we have the opportunity to do something about that. Shirley, I know you're here. I saw you earlier. Latino Access, there you are. And the challenge here is access. How do we help Latinos grow? I don't want to give you all the doom and gloom. There is a lot of great stuff, but I'm going to drop you with one last point, which I think is very important. It's the next slide. And it looks like all the data didn't come through on that. Sorry about that. Political perspectives. This is disappointing, again, and again, I'm sorry to have to be the bearer of bad news, but I think we can do something about this. This data point is the belief of a possibility of a Latino president. It decreased from 2018 to 2023 among every single age group, and quite significantly. But what I think it is a lack of strong leadership. And I'll tell you what I mean. As Richard said before, I think at the very top, having a single figure or a single body isn't what Latinos are looking for anymore. I think today, as he said, it's peer-to-peer. It's in my neighborhood, in my community. So it's upon all of us as business leaders, as members of the advocacy community, to ensure that our work is present and that we continue to grow it on the local level, because this can't be the case. We can't have our community believing that within their lifetime, that there's not going to be the opportunity for the most significant leadership role in the country for Latinos. That's what I have for you today as a preview. I'm sorry it's a bit of a downer, but the good news is we all have something we can do about it. So let's get to work. Let's build those action plans tomorrow, and we'll see you. Thank you.